Perspective now from Anthony Scaramucci, who briefly served as communications director in the previous administration. He currently supports former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie in the 2024 Republican primary race. Also with us, CNN political analyst and New York Times national political reporter Astead Hernon, and CNN contributor John Dean, who knew when to remain silent and when to talk, as Richard Nixon's White House counsel during Watergate. Counselor, I do want to start with you because Paula Reed mentioned eyebrows being raised by this order from the special counsel asking for this evidence to remain secret, for the Trump team not to leak any of this information because of ongoing investigations. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me it's not dissimilar from the situation that District Attorney Bragg asked for a similar motion at the state level. So this is standard procedure with Donald Trump now, because we know he cannot keep it zipped and will chatter up and share information that should not be shared. So this is a fairly standard protective order under the federal rules of criminal procedure, not unusual. What's interesting, John, is the judge who issued the ruling, and that was the magistrate judge, Judge Reinhardt, who is assigned with Judge Cannon, but is far more seasoned in criminal trials. He, in fact, has a criminal trial background. He was in the Department of Justice and probably knows Jack Smith.
Counselor John, you say the former president can't keep it zipped. What are the types of things that he could say or would be likely to say during a political speech that could get him in trouble in a courtroom?
Well, he has had a consistent habit of making admissions against interest. In fact, the defamation case by Jean Carroll against him was largely based on his own admissions, both in a deposition as well as outside the deposition. He got a subsequent action filed against him because of his inability to keep a lip closed. So, who knows where he'll go? But he could give leads to others as to what the government was doing that is inevitable to be shown to him as it relates to his case. So these are the sort of things that this protective order seeks to caution and protect.
Anthony Scaramucci, great to see you here by tonight. So in this post we're talking about today, you saw the former president attack Bill Barr, John Bolton, Mick Mulvaney. In a separate one, he went after someone you worked with briefly in the White House, former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, calling Kelly, quote, weak and ineffective, born with a very small brain. Of course, Trump hired Kelly. Trump hired Kelly, and praised him up and down and everywhere. What do these attacks tell you about where Trump's head is?
Well, the first thing I would say, General Kelly's first act in the White House was to fire me, and so him and I went on to become very close friends. And if you ever get General Kelly sitting in a chair like this, he probably saved the country over the 18-month tenure no less than 5 or 10 times from near catastrophe based on decisions, recklessness, lack of intellectual curiosity from the president, lack of executive management skills. And so General Kelly is an American hero. And so when he says nonsense like that, it's really him projecting how he feels about himself. And so Mick is a good guy. You mentioned John Bolton, also a very experienced, competent person. But all of these people are in the conundrum that President Trump puts you in, where he wants asymmetric loyalty. He wants to be reckless and do things that are borderline criminal, if not over the edge of criminal. And he wants you to sit there and defend him religiously, like some of the nutcases that are still working for him. And so if you love the country and you love yourself, you have to speak out against this sort of stuff, and you have to explain to the American people how wrong his actions are. Now, he deserves his day in court on these allegations for sure, but I want people to think about the totality of everything. Governor Christie said on your network a few days ago, he can't be the unluckiest person in the world where he's involved with a sexual allegation case, a documents case, a premeditation on the J6 situation, and election interference in the state of Georgia. It's not all somebody else's problem and not his problem. And I think ultimately the dam will break here, John, and the American people or the MAGA voters, hopefully they'll look for a different solution and not him.
Instead, except for Anthony's guy, Chris Christie, most of the Republican candidates aren't out there talking about this. And by this, I mean,
afraid of him.
Well, what would it take
Yeah.
for them not to be afraid of him? Because it's just piling up.
I mean, there is the obvious point, which they're afraid of Donald Trump and the kind of media attention he can bring, the kind of way he can sink somebody's poll numbers with a drop of a statement or a nickname. But the real thing they're afraid of is the electorate that has not really rallied around Donald Trump and has really created a difficult space for candidates to be able to attack him, even on this very obvious thing. I mean, the question really is for Republican voters, do they see these as individual charges against Donald Trump? Or do they see these as a continuance of a federal government that has been weaponized against conservatives? The answer that they would give you to the kind of question that Anthony's posing here is not that Donald Trump is unlucky, but that the federal government itself is targeting Republicans and conservatives. That's the built-in answer for a lot of Republican electorate voters. And so for them, it is very easy. You know, I was just in Iowa this week. I was in Iowa the day the federal charges came down, talking to Republican voters, people who had been open to alternatives, people like Ron DeSantis and others. If you're in the camp of voting open for alternatives, I think that this has pushed you a little further to that. And there are some Republicans who very are. But if you're in the camp of folks who have supported Donald Trump, which remains a plurality in relationship to the other candidates, you're digging further in because you think this is just the biggest and deepest example of the federal government targeting Donald Trump.
And I said, Anthony, both of you weigh in here.
It's not, though. I mean,
Okay.
Yeah, I know. I'm
it's
just doing
not.
the political fallout, but you're to your
I
point.
understand,
That
you know,
is-
it's
yeah.
not, but that's the entrenchment. You see, ultimately, those people, and again, I was with Mr. Trump, President Trump, on 71 campaign stops. Those people are disenfranchised. Those people feel left out of the system. We turned blue-collar people who were once economically aspirational, that's the home I grew up in, into economically desperational. So he's the avatar for their anger. He can do anything.
What I'm trying to envision is the first one or two debates. Donald Trump's not there. Let's say he's not there at these debates. How do these other candidates, again, your guy aside, if he does make it to the debate stage, are they just going to let all questions about Donald Trump say, oh, nothing to see here,
Yeah.
we're not paying attention to this?
Well, I think this is why the indictment charges being so specific and so dramatic are actually really important because it's given people space to be able to say, okay, even if I think this is a federal government, you saw Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis say I would have been court-martialed if I handled documents like this. They're going to try to make an argument that this is another example of Donald Trump's unique unpreparedness and unfitness, and they're going to try to use the substance of the case while at the same time walking a pretty thin line. But the problem is, it doesn't just start with Donald Trump or these cases. Republicans have been building in the argument about the federal government targeting their party and their voters for years and years leading up to this. And so it's very hard for them to be able to make the case now because they have not tilled that ground with their voters. Their voters are actually primed on the opposite side to be able to defend them instead of being able to really pull from their support.
It's a brilliant analysis. Can I just add something quickly? Someone in that candidate base should try to become an entrepreneur and go and reach out into the disenfranchised voters. We have 140 plus million people that don't vote in the country. Many of them were formerly registered as Republicans, and create a new market and go around the Donald Trump situation as opposed to listening to their political consultants and parrying to the right of Donald Trump the way Ron DeSantis has done.
That's interesting.
We'll see. Counselor, if you're still with us, I do have one more legal question here because it's notable. And the Wall Street Journal gets into this in an article today that's really interesting, is that the special counsel did not push for things that he might have in a standard case in terms of restrictions on a defendant. He did not push for travel restrictions. He did not push for any kind of a gag order here. Why do you think that Jack Smith and his team has decided to give Donald Trump some space?
I think they decided it was appropriate, given the high office he did come from, to honor that respect of the office and the man who once held it. I think there's no question that they weren't really concerned that he would disappear, even though he has his own airplane, which is one of the number one concerns with flight and travel. And where's he going to go? He's a very conspicuous person. He'd literally have to leave the country and find sanctuary in Russia or someplace where they wouldn't extradite him. So it's very unlikely that he would violate these basic norms.